And within that cell, you have a lot of different organelles, they're called. So mitochondria being one. And so autophagy kind of helps clear out all this stuff inside of the cell. Mitophagy is very specific to just the mitochondria within the cell. Those mitochondria get older and they don't have a really good repair process. And so they accumulate damage. And as they get older, you're not going to be making energy as well. You're not going to be using energy as well. It's going to affect all the cell function because energy is at the core of everything, right? So mitochondrial health is at the core of all health, basically.
The Cold Case of Aging, a Factory Town detective mystery. A story about mitochondria, mitophagy, inflammaging, fasting, and strong aerobic exercise. Among the cases, an older person who seems to have slowed down, an overweight person who seems to be carrying more than just extra weight, and a person with obvious signs of chronic inflammation. Stiff, puffy, tired, hurting, worn down. And then you ask, how did this happen? Most people reach for the usual suspects. They say age, they say hormones, they say bad luck, genetics, or just the passage of time. But then we ask a better detective question. Why? Why does age bring decline? Why do hormones become dysregulated? Why does the body become inflamed, tired, weak, resistant, or dysfunctional? If we keep asking why and keep digging deeper, we begin to uncover the real culprit, mitochondrial dysfunction. Welcome to Factory Town. Imagine that every cell in your body is a little factory town. This town has roads, workers, machines, communication systems, supply lines, cleanup crews, and neighborhoods. Everything has to stay organized for the town to run properly. But the most important buildings in town are the power factories. These are the mitochondria. Their job is to produce the energy that keeps the whole town alive and functioning. They power repair. They power movement. They power clear thinking. They power healing. They power muscle contraction. They power immune regulation. They power the heart. They power the brain. They power everything. So if you want to solve the mystery of why the town is breaking down, you had better investigate the power factories. If the power factories start failing, everything downstream begins to wobble. The brain becomes more vulnerable. The heart becomes less resilient. Skeletal muscle weakens and tires more easily. Fat handling gets sloppy. Inflammation rises. The immune system becomes more reactive and less intelligent. Now, the older person, the overweight person, and the inflamed person are no longer three separate mysteries. They may be three versions of the same mystery. The detective question. Why? An older person is losing strength. Why? Because the muscles are not functioning well. Why? Because energy production and repair are not what they used to be. Why? Because the quality of the mitochondria has declined. An overweight person is storing more and burning less. Why? Because the body has become less metabolically flexible. Why? Because the energy systems are not responding efficiently. Why? Because the mitochondria are no longer handling fuel the way they should. A chronically inflamed person feels stiff, tired, puffy, achy, and dysregulated. Why? Because the alarm system of the body is staying switched on. Why? Because the cell keeps sensing danger. Why? Because damaged mitochondria are leaking signals that make the cell think something is terribly wrong. Now, the same detective work should be applied to literally any macro-level symptoms. For example, many of my clients are going through or have gone through menopause. So she experiences hot flashes, night sweats, poor sleep, and mood shifts. Why? Because estrogen and progesterone output become erratic and then decline. Why? Because the ovaries have aged and can no longer sustain normal follicle and hormone function. Why? Because the follicles and support cells lose function and resilience. But why? Because mitochondrial dysfunction impairs energy production, redox control, quality control, and accelerates ovarian aging. Scientifically, mitochondrial dysfunction appears to be one of the major deep drivers of ovarian aging, which in turn drives menopause symptoms through loss of hormone function. So we keep digging, and we keep running into the same culprit: mitochondrial dysfunction. The real role of mitochondria. Most people hear that mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, and that is true, but it is almost too simple. Mitochondria are not just batteries. They are more like living power factories with their own machinery, their own internal instruction manuals, their own maintenance issues, and their own need for inspection and replacement. They help regulate energy, yes, but they also help regulate stress signals, inflammation, cell survival, and metabolic flexibility. So if these power factories begin to break down, the problem is not just that the lights flicker. The whole town begins to lose order. Enter Inspector Pink 1. Every town needs an inspector. In Factory Town, that inspector is Inspector Pink 1. In this story, he is the Pink Panther. In biochemistry, Pink 1 is the name of the protein that inspects all of the mitochondria. In our story, the Pink Panther is called the Pink One, Inspector Pink 1. And this is how the Pink Panther, our Inspector Pink 1, will always remind you of the protein Pink 1. He moves quietly through the town, checking the condition of the power factories. As long as a power factory is healthy, Inspector Pink 1 does not linger. He moves on. Nothing to see here. But when one of the power factories becomes damaged, he stops. Maybe the machinery is sputtering. Maybe the energy output is poor. Maybe the walls are unstable. Maybe the factory is leaking distress. Inspector Pink 1 recognizes that this power factory is no longer trustworthy. The real danger in Factory Town is not just that a factory gets old. The real danger is when a damaged factory is allowed to remain in service. Enter Parkin, the smiling red Tesla. Now, this Tesla is a self-parking Tesla, as you can see written on his hood. He's a self-parking Tesla because he doesn't need the assistance of a driver in order to park himself. Now, we just shorten his name from self-parking to Parkin. Why? Because that image and that name will forever remind you that in biochemistry, the name of the protein is called Parkin. Once Inspector Pink 1 identifies a failing power factory, he calls in backup, and that backup is Parkin. Now this happy red Tesla rolls up to the damaged factory and starts slapping big bright sticky notes all over it. These sticky notes are called ubiquitin. They are condemnation notices that say, unsafe, damaged, remove this building. So now the town knows there is a problem. The inspector found it. The red Tesla tagged it. the failing factory has officially been marked for demolition. So far, the system is working beautifully, but only if the next crew arrives. The demolition and recycling crew. Now comes one of the most important systems in all of Factory Town, mitophagy. Mitophagy is the demolition and recycling crew. Their job is to remove damaged power factories before they poison the neighborhood. They tear down unsafe structures, haul away the debris, recycle whatever useful parts can be salvaged, and make room for newer, healthier power factories to take their place. This is how Factory Town stays young, not by pretending no factories ever wear down, but by identifying the bad ones and removing them efficiently. A young, healthy town is not one with zero wear and tear. It is one with excellent cleanup and replacement. What happens when mitophagy fails? Now the story turns into a cold case. Suppose Inspector Pink 1 does his job. Suppose the smiling red Tesla shows up and tags the damaged building with sticky note condemnation stickers. But suppose the demolition and recycling crew never arrives. Now the broken power factory stays in service. It keeps producing poor energy. It leaks waste. It pollutes the neighborhood. It becomes unstable. And then the real disaster begins. Inside every power factory are the factory's own blueprints and instruction manuals. These are the mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. Those blueprints are supposed to remain safely locked inside the factory. But this damaged factory is now so unstable that the blueprints begin to spill out into the streets. Okay, this is sea gas. Yes, gas coming from the sea. I know it's a little weird, but it will help you to remember our next character, Captain Seagas. Captain Seagas is a street-level investigator. He patrols Factory Town looking for suspicious evidence. And one day, he sees something shocking. Secret factory blueprints scattered in the street. He immediately assumes this is a crime scene. He does not say, "Oh, that must be one of our own factories having maintenance issues." No, he says, "Blueprints in the street. This looks like danger. This looks like sabotage. This looks like an invasion." The reason Captain Seagas is alarmed is because mtDNA, the mitochondrial DNA, looks just like bacterial DNA, because your mitochondria are the descendants of bacteria. So Captain Seagas sees bacterial DNA all over the place, which is alarming. This means invasion. So Captain Seagas sends out an emergency dispatch message. That dispatch is called C-GAMP. And for our purposes, GAMP stands for Get a Message Pronto. Why? Because this is awfully important. That emergency message goes to Central Command, and Central Command is run by none other than Rockstar Sting. In biochemistry, Sting is a signaling adapter protein found mainly on the endoplasmic reticulum membrane. Its job is to act like an alarm hub for DNA danger signals inside the cell. Now, for our purposes, we use Rockstar Sting to remind us of the protein called Sting. So you can never forget that the signal, the alarm signal, will always come from Sting. Now, once he confirms the C-GAMP message from C-Gas, Sting does what Sting does best. He picks up the microphone and he sounds the alarm. And of course, Sting's voice travels far and wide. Then sirens begin blaring across Factory Town. Emergency signals light up. Workers are diverted. Resources are pulled into defense mode. The whole town shifts into a state of alarm. That town-wide alarm response is called inflammation. At first, inflammation is useful. If there's a real threat, you want a fast response. But here's the twist in the mystery. There is no outside invader. The town is reacting to its own spilled blueprints. This is not enemy sabotage. This is failed cleanup. And because the broken power factories are still sitting there, the blueprints keep spilling. Captain Seagas keeps finding them. And Sting keeps sounding the alarm. Now the town is trapped in chronic emergency mode. This is called inflammaging. When this goes on for long enough, some neighborhoods in Factory Town begin to decay. The buildings are still standing, but they are not functioning properly. They no longer contribute the way they should. They just sit there in a damaged state, releasing harmful signals into the environment. These are the senescent cells. You might call them zombie cells. They're not dead, but they are no longer truly healthy citizens of the town anymore. They become blighted neighborhoods. And now the whole town starts to feel older than it should. More inflamed, more tired, more fragile, more dysfunctional. So now we can answer the opening question. How did this happen? Not just age, not just hormones. These are surface level answers. When we keep asking why, we go deeper and find a more fundamental culprit. Failing power factories, poor cleanup, spilled blueprints, chronic alarms, and blighted neighborhoods. That is mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, all of this can help explain why the decline looks so widespread. Why does the brain suffer? Because the brain is one of the most energy-hungry organs in the body. If the power factories fail and the alarm system stays active, brain function becomes more vulnerable. Why does the heart suffer? Because the heart requires constant, high-level energy production. Weak factories mean a less resilient engine. Why does skeletal muscle suffer? Because muscle depends heavily on healthy mitochondria for endurance, recovery, and metabolic efficiency. When the power factories decline, strength and stamina follow. And what about autoimmune conditions like myasthenia gravis or rheumatoid arthritis? Now, we should be careful not to oversimplify. These diseases are complex. But if the body is living in a constant state of mitochondrial distress, chronic danger signaling, and inflammation, that may help create the kind of environment in which immune dysfunction becomes more likely or more damaging. So mitochondrial dysfunction may not be the only criminal in the file, but it may be the mastermind behind a lot more of the chaos than people realize. So is there anything that we can do? The answer is yes. And two of the most important tools that we have are fasting and strong aerobic exercise. These help change the ending of the case. Fasting gives Factory Town something it desperately needs: a maintenance window. When the town is constantly flooded with incoming deliveries, incoming fuel, and constant storage demands, it spends most of its time processing traffic. Now, just by the sheer volume of traffic that each mitochondrion must process, invariably it's going to drop some of its boxes. Dropping a box is tantamount to the creation of a reactive oxygen species. This results in oxidative stress and ultimately damage to the mitochondrial DNA. Now, when enough of this damage happens, eventually, if left unchecked, this mitochondrial DNA floods out of the mitochondrion and into the cytosol of the cell. But when food intake pauses, the town gets a break from non-stop delivery mode. That gives more room for inspection, cleanup, repair, and internal housekeeping. Fasting gives Factory Town more time to clean house. It lowers the pressure of constant incoming supply. It encourages maintenance mode. It supports cleanup culture. It helps the town to focus inward. If mitophagy is the demolition and recycling crew, fasting is like clearing the roads so that crew can actually get to work. Fasting does not do all the work by itself, but it changes the environment in favor of quality control. Now, let's talk about strong aerobic exercise, like step aerobics. If fasting creates the maintenance window, strong aerobic exercise creates the demand for better power factories. When you do serious aerobic work, the town gets the message. We need more power, we need cleaner power, and we need stronger power factories. That changes the story in three major ways. First, it stresses the grid in a good way. Weak factories get exposed. Second, it pushes the town to upgrade its power infrastructure. New and better factories are built. And thirdly, it improves the town's capacity to produce and use energy efficiently. Step aerobics tells Factory Town to modernize the power plants. It's not just exercise for burning calories. It is a signal to the town. Upgrade the energy system. So, if fasting helps with cleanup, strong aerobic exercise helps with construction and performance. One clears out the junk, the other upgrades the grid. That is a very powerful combination. The real conclusion. So let's return to the opening image. The older person, the overweight person, and the inflamed person. And we ask again, how did this happen? Yes, age is involved. Yes, hormones are involved. But those are not the deepest answer. When we keep asking why, we dig beneath the symptoms, beneath the labels, beneath the usual suspects, and we uncover one of the central drivers of decline: mitochondrial dysfunction. The failing of the power factories, the breakdown of inspection and cleanup, the spilling of blueprints into the street, the activation of the alarm system, the spread of blighted neighborhoods, the gradual aging of the whole town from the inside out. But the story is not hopeless, because we can change the conditions in Factory Town. Fasting helps the town clean house. Strong aerobic exercise helps the town build better power factories. And when those two work together, the case starts to turn. The alarms quiet down, the streets get cleaner, the power gets stronger, the neighborhoods recover, and Factory Town has a much better chance of staying young. you.